Good afternoon, my friends. We are not gathered here today to learn something new, nor are we here to acquire a method, a system, or a technique. We are not here to add another spiritual idea to the many ideas we already carry. If that were our purpose, this meeting would serve little value. What we are here for is something far simpler and far more difficult for the human mind to accept. We are here to let go. We are here to become still enough to recognize what already is. Most of you who have found your way here have already prayed. You have already sought healing. You have already worked with truth, with affirmations, with treatments, with meditation. Many of you have read deeply, studied faithfully, and practiced sincerely, and yet, in spite of all this effort, there remains a sense that something has not quite yielded, something that is not quite dissolved. It is not because you have failed. It is not because you have lacked faith or devotion. It is because the very effort to heal can sometimes be the subtle confession that God is not already present. Now, this is not said in criticism, and it is not said in judgment. It is said simply as a statement of spiritual fact. Whenever we begin with the assumption that something must be fixed, improved, corrected, or healed, we have already begun from the premise that God is absent from that situation. And yet Scripture tells us, "Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence?" If God is omnipresent and there is no teaching in Scripture that denies this, then God is present before the problem appears, while the problem appears, and after the problem disappears. God does not arrive late on the scene of human difficulty. The infinite way does not begin with a problem. It does not even begin with the desire for healing. It begins with God. In the beginning, God. Not in the middle, God. Not after diagnosis, God. Not after prayer, God. In the beginning, God. And if God is in the beginning, then God is the foundation, the substance, the law, and the presence of all that truly is. Upon this foundation, we must build, or rather, we must allow ourselves to rest. There is a great temptation in spiritual work to do something, to say something, to think something, to make something happen. The human mind feels uncomfortable with stillness. It feels unsafe without activity. And so even in prayer, it wants to move, to act, to direct, to guide God as to what must be done. Yet the Master said, "Be still and know that I am God." He did not say, "Be busy and try to become spiritual." He did not say, "Work harder and thou shalt know." He said, "Be still." And stillness is not inactivity of the body. It is surrender of the personal sense of control. We are not here to ask God to do something for us. God is not a distant power waiting for instruction. God is the very life of your being. I and my Father are one. That is not poetry. That is not theology. That is a statement of identity. And if that is true, then there is no place where God is not, no moment where God is not functioning, and no condition in which God has ceased to be the only presence and the only power. Therefore, as we begin, let us drop the idea that something needs to be accomplished here today. Let us drop the belief that healing must occur through effort, struggle, or intense concentration. Healing, in the spiritual sense, is not an event. It is the recognition of what has always been true. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Truth does not become true when you know it. Truth is true, and your knowing simply removes the veil that has obscured it. If you will notice, the Scriptures never tell us that truth will be created, improved, or developed. Truth is revealed, and revelation does not come through effort. Revelation comes when resistance ceases. The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. That kingdom is not built, it is not earned, it is not achieved, it is recognized. So let us begin by laying aside, just for this moment, the burden of trying to heal ourselves or anyone else. Let us release the mental pressure of fixing, correcting, or overcoming. Let us rest in the simple acknowledgement that God is here, that God is now, and that God is sufficient. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Not I shall not want after this treatment, but I shall not want, because where God is realized, lack has no place to stand. This first step is not a step at all. It is a pause, a holy pause, a cessation of striving. And in this pause, something remarkable begins to happen, not outwardly, but inwardly. The mind quiets, the will relaxes, the heart softens. And in that softening, we prepare ourselves not to heal, but to see. And seeing in the infinite way is everything. Now let us look calmly and without judgment at why effort seems so reasonable to us. From the human standpoint, effort appears not only logical but necessary. From childhood, we are trained to believe that nothing comes without striving, that improvement requires labor, that healing requires action, and that problems yield only to struggle. This belief is not personal, it is universal. It is the atmosphere of human consciousness. And because it is universal, it feels natural, unquestionable, even righteous. Yet the very universality of a belief does not make it true. The human mind reasons in this way. If there is pain, something must be done. If there is lack, something must be achieved. If there is sickness, something must be corrected. And so effort becomes the instinctive response. We try harder to pray. We concentrate more intensely. We repeat more words. We search for deeper causes. We discipline thought. We attempt to use truth as a tool. But all of this activity, however sincere, begins from the same mistaken premise, that harmony is absent and must be brought into being. Spiritual truth does not operate on that premise. The Christ message does not begin with absence. It begins with presence. Before Abraham was, I am. Not I will be, not I may become, I am. This is the eternal now of spirit, the timeless presence of God, untouched by human conditions. When we attempt to heal through effort, we are unknowingly confessing that this I am is not sufficient, not active, not already functioning. Effort says, in effect, God must be persuaded, activated, or directed. And yet Jesus never once suggested that God needed assistance. Effort belongs to the realm of effect. It belongs to the world where cause and effect appear separate, where time governs outcome, and where change is believed to come through manipulation. Spiritual healing does not operate in this realm. Spiritual healing is not the improvement of effect. It is the recognition of cause, and cause is not something we move toward. Cause is something we awaken to. In Him we live and move and have our being. That is not a future attainment. It is a present fact. This is why effort fails spiritually, not because effort is wrong on the human plane, but because it has no place on the spiritual plane. You may exert effort to build a house, to learn a language, or to strengthen the body, but you cannot exert effort to make God more present. You cannot work to make truth more true. You cannot strive your way into omnipresence. God does not respond to effort. God is revealed in surrender. There is a subtle point here that must be understood if spiritual healing is to become natural rather than exhausting. The mind believes it is helping when it is active. Silence feels unproductive. Stillness feels like doing nothing. And yet the master withdrew into the wilderness, not to plan, not to speak, not to heal, but to be. He did not overcome temptation by effort. He overcame it by recognition. Get thee behind me, Satan, was not a struggle. It was a refusal to accept an illusion of power apart from God. When we strive to heal, we are still dealing with appearances. We are still trying to rearrange the furniture in the dream. We are still assuming that something is wrong in God's creation and that our task is to correct it. But the infinite way reveals something altogether different, that harmony is not produced, it is uncovered. Health is not created, it is revealed. Peace is not achieved, it is recognized. The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Darkness is not removed by effort. It vanishes when light is acknowledged. This is why spiritual healing never begins with the question, what must I do? It begins with the question, what is true? And the moment that question is honestly faced, effort naturally dissolves. For if God is infinite, where can discord be? If God is omnipresent, where can absence exist? If God is omnipotent, what power can oppose him? These are not questions to be answered mentally. They are realizations to be lived into. So we begin to see that effort, though well-intentioned, belongs to a level of consciousness that has not yet rested in God. It is the activity of the personal sense, the belief in a self apart from divine government. And as long as that belief is active, healing will appear difficult, delayed, or uncertain. But when that belief yields, when effort ceases and recognition begins, then healing becomes as natural as waking from sleep. This is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is alignment with reality. Not my will, but thy will be done. That is not the language of defeat. It is the language of spiritual power. It is the moment when personal effort steps aside and divine action is revealed. And divine action is effortless, immediate, and complete. We are not asked to overcome effort by force. We are asked to see through it. We are asked to recognize that God has never required our help to be God. Our only function is to stop interfering with the truth of being. And this brings us naturally to the next unfoldment, where we must look honestly at what we have been treating all along and why that very treatment has kept us bound to appearances. Now we come to a point that often determines whether spiritual healing becomes simple or remains a lifelong struggle. It is here that many sincere students, even after years of study, find themselves going in circles, not because they lack devotion, but because they are unknowingly working from a false premise. That premise is the belief that we are dealing with conditions, bodies, persons, or circumstances. And so long as that belief is active, no amount of spiritual truth will fully register. Let us be very clear and very gentle about this. In the infinite way, we are not dealing with bodies. We are not dealing with organs, tissues, nerves, or systems. We are not dealing with diseases, names, symptoms, or diagnoses. We are not dealing with people as personalities, histories, or problems. And we are not dealing with conditions whether they appear as sickness, lack, fear, sin, or limitation. All of these belong to the realm of appearance. All of these belong to the world of sense testimony. And sense testimony, no matter how convincing, is never the basis of spiritual work. This is not a denial in the human sense. We are not pretending that appearances do not appear. We are not ignoring human experience, but we are refusing to grant appearances the authority of reality. There is a vast difference between acknowledging that something appears and accepting that it is. Spiritual healing does not occur by fixing appearances. It occurs by seeing through them. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not condemnation, it is recognition. The mistake comes when we attempt to apply spiritual truth to a condition. We say, I am treating my body, or I am working on this disease, or I am praying about my lack. The moment we do this, we have already stepped out of the spiritual plane and into the mental plane. We have already assumed that the condition has reality, presence, and power. And then we wonder why the treatment feels heavy, why the work seems difficult, why progress appears slow. We are trying to lift a weight that was never meant to be lifted. Spiritual truth does not operate on effects. It operates on consciousness. Consciousness is the only place where anything appears, and therefore it is the only place where anything can dissolve. When consciousness is illumined, appearances change naturally, not because they were attacked, but because they were never sustained by truth. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. This does not mean that thoughts create reality. It means that belief determines experience. And belief, when exposed to truth, loses its power without struggle. Now, here is the subtlety that must be understood. When we focus on a condition, even spiritually, we keep consciousness fixed at the level of the condition. We may speak words of truth, but our attention remains on the problem. We may affirm God's presence, but our awareness is still watching the symptom. This divided consciousness cannot heal because it has not yet chosen reality over appearance. No man can serve two masters. We cannot acknowledge God as the only power while secretly monitoring another power. Jesus never treated conditions. He never worked on blindness, leprosy, paralysis, or death. He did not address symptoms. He addressed consciousness. Stretch forth thine hand. Take up thy bed and walk. Lazarus, come forth. These were not commands to matter. They were awakenings of awareness. They carried no concern for process, no interest in cause, no fascination with pathology. They rested entirely on one recognition, that God is, and that nothing unlike God has law, substance, or authority. We must understand this deeply if we are to be free from endless spiritual labor. The moment we stop treating conditions, we stop reinforcing them. The moment we withdraw attention from appearances, they begin to lose their hold. This is why the Infinite Way insists that treatment begins with turning away, not away from God, but away from the problem, looking unto Jesus, not looking unto the body, the bank account, the relationship, or the diagnosis. What we behold, we empower. What we withdraw from, we disarm. This does not mean that we ignore human needs or become indifferent to suffering. On the contrary, it is the highest form of compassion. To see a person as sick is not compassion. It is agreement with the illusion. To see a person as poor is not kindness. It is consent to limitation. True love sees as God sees. Call no man your father upon the earth. In other words, do not identify anyone by human origin, human condition, or human history. Know them only as the child of God. When we begin to work in this way, something remarkable happens. The strain disappears. The sense of responsibility lifts. The pressure to produce results dissolves. We are no longer trying to heal someone or something. We are simply bearing witness to what is true. And truth does not need defense. Truth does not need reinforcement. Truth stands on its own, and when it is recognized, it reveals itself as harmony. So we learn gradually, and sometimes reluctantly, to stop asking what is wrong here and begin resting in the question, where is God in this? And when that question is sincerely asked, not mentally, but inwardly, the answer comes, not in words, but in peace. And peace is always the sign that consciousness has shifted from appearance to reality. This brings us naturally to the next unfoldment, where we must understand more clearly what these appearances actually are and why they have seemed so convincing for so long. Now, having laid aside the belief that we are dealing with conditions, we are ready to see more clearly what these appearances actually are. This is one of the most liberating revelations of the infinite way, and yet one of the most difficult for the human mind to accept, because it removes fear at its root. Disease, lack, fear, and discord are not realities to be overcome. They are hypnotic suggestions to be recognized and dismissed. And until this is understood, spiritual healing will seem mysterious, inconsistent, or reserved for a few. When we use the word hypnotism, we are not speaking of imagination, nor are we speaking of deception in the human sense. We are speaking of a universal belief, accepted unconsciously, that there exists a power apart from God. This belief is not personal. It is not your belief or my belief. It is the atmosphere of human thought, the world belief that the Master referred to when he said, I have overcome the world. He did not overcome people, nor conditions. He overcame this universal mesmerism that claims reality for appearances. Hypnotism works only through consent. It has no power of its own. A suggestion is powerless unless it is accepted. And yet the acceptance is often so automatic, so habitual, that we do not even recognize it as acceptance. We see a symptom, hear a diagnosis, read a statistic, feel a sensation, and immediately consciousness says, this is real. This has power. This must be dealt with. That moment is the moment of consent. That moment is the moment when hypnotism takes hold. Scripture gives us a profound clue to this when it says, as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. It does not say that thought creates reality. It says that belief governs experience. There is a vast difference. God alone creates. Man does not create disease, health, lack, or abundance. But man does experience what he consents to believe, and belief, when exposed to spiritual truth, collapses of its own nothingness. The Master never treated disease as an entity. He never spoke of it as having cause, law, or duration. He never asked how long it had been there, how severe it was, or what name it bore. He did not dignify appearances with investigation. Instead, he addressed the false sense of life that believed in separation from God. Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Fear, not disease, was the enemy. Fear was the acceptance of another power. When Jesus said, resist not evil, he was not teaching passivity. He was revealing the nature of evil itself. Evil has no power except the power we give it by resistance. To fight it is to acknowledge it. To fear it is to enthrone it, but to recognize it as illusion is to dissolve it. Light does not battle darkness. Darkness disappears in the presence of light. In the same way, hypnotic belief does not yield to struggle, it yields to recognition. Now, this applies equally to what the world calls physical disease, emotional disorder, financial lack, or personal failure. The form does not matter. Hypnotism always presents itself as something specific, something personal, something urgent. It says, this is your body, or this is your condition, or this is your problem. And the infinite way answers calmly, firmly, and finally, this is not a person, this is not a condition, this is not a power. This is a suggestion. Once this is understood, fear begins to loosen its grip. We no longer feel compelled to rush into action. We no longer feel obligated to fix or manage appearances. We begin to see that the real work is not outward but inward, not in changing things, but in withdrawing belief. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. Standing still is not inactivity. It is the refusal to react. This is why spiritual healing often begins the moment fear stops. Fear is the evidence that hypnotism has been accepted. Peace is the evidence that it has been broken. Peace does not come from improvement of conditions. Peace comes from recognition of reality. And reality is God, infinite, omnipresent, omnipotent, indivisible. When we understand this, healing no longer feels like a struggle against forces. It becomes a gentle awakening. The mind relaxes, the heart opens, the sense of personal burden lifts. We are no longer trying to save ourselves from something. We are awakening to what has always been true. Perfect love casteth out fear. Love does not argue with fear. It displaces it. And so we learn, little by little, to meet every appearance, no matter how aggressive, with the same inner response. This is not a power. This is not a law. This is not a reality in God's universe. And we do not say this as a formula. We do not repeat it as a mantra. We recognize it as truth. And in that recognition, the suggestion loses its authority. This brings us to the next unfoldment, which is the practical heart of infinite way treatment. The moment when we consciously withdraw belief and stand in the recognition of God alone. Now we come to a moment in this unfoldment that is both simple and decisive. It is a moment that does not require preparation, ritual, or long study, yet it changes the entire direction of spiritual work. This is the moment of withdrawal, the moment when consciousness quietly, firmly, and without argument turns away from appearance and rests in truth. It is here that most of the work is done, and it is here that many fail, not because it is difficult, but because it appears too simple. Withdrawal does not mean denial in the human sense. It does not mean closing one's eyes to what seems to be happening. It does not mean pretending that symptoms are not present or that challenges are not appearing. Withdrawal means something very specific in the infinite way. It means withdrawing belief. It means withdrawing consent. It means refusing to grant reality, power, or law to that which is unlike God. When a claim presents itself, whether as disease, fear, lack, or discord, the natural human impulse is to move toward it mentally. We analyze it, we name it, we measure it, we watch it. We wonder how long it will last and what must be done about it. All of this is movement toward the appearance. All of this is participation in the hypnotic suggestion. The infinite way reverses this movement. It teaches us to stop, to pause, and inwardly to say with quiet authority, this is not a person, this is not a condition, this is not a power. Notice that we do not say, this will get better, or this must go away. Those statements still assume reality. We do not say, God will fix this. That assumes God is absent. We say simply, this is not. And we say it not as a mental declaration, but as a recognition. It is the same recognition one has upon waking from a dream. When you awaken, you do not struggle with the dream or try to improve it. You recognize that it was never real. This single act of withdrawal accomplishes far more than hours of mental treatment. It removes the fuel from the fire. It breaks the agreement that keeps the appearance active. It is for this reason that I have said so often that more than half of the healing work is completed when we realize that we are not dealing with a person or a condition. We are dealing with a belief, and belief has no power when it is not accepted. This is not an aggressive act. It is not a battle. There is no sense of force in it. It is a gentle but final turning away. Get thee behind me. That was not spoken in fear or anger. It was spoken in clarity. The master did not wrestle with temptation. He dismissed it. He did not negotiate with error. He recognized it as nothingness. And that same Christ consciousness is available to us not as a historical memory, but as a present activity within. When you withdraw belief in this way, you may notice an immediate sense of relief, or you may notice nothing at all. Do not measure the result. Measurement is another form of return to appearance. The withdrawal itself is the act. The rest belongs to God. The battle is not yours, but God's. And God does not battle. God reveals. You must be faithful at this point and not allow thought to wander back to the body, the condition, or the person. The temptation will come. The suggestion will return and say, but look, nothing has changed, or the pain is still there, or the problem remains. That is the moment when you stand still. That is the moment when you do not argue, explain, or react. You simply remain in the recognition that you are not dealing with reality, but with a suggestion that has already been denied admission. It is important to understand that withdrawal is not something you do once and then forget. It is a state of consciousness to be maintained. Not maintained through tension, but through awareness. If the claim returns, you do not become discouraged. You do not blame yourself. You simply repeat the same inward recognition, calmly and impersonally. This is not stubbornness. It is faith. Faith is not belief in a future outcome. Faith is steadfastness in present truth. As this practice becomes natural, you will find that you are no longer fascinated by appearances. You no longer feel compelled to tell the story, to explain the symptoms, or to rehearse the difficulty. The story loses its importance because you have ceased to believe in it. And when belief goes, experience follows. Always. There is no exception to this law. This moment of withdrawal is the doorway into stillness. Once belief has been withdrawn, There is nothing left to struggle against. The mind can rest. The heart can open. Consciousness can turn fully toward God, not to ask for help, but to be aware of presence. And it is this turning, this resting in God, that completes what withdrawal has begun. This leads us directly to the next unfoldment, where we must understand why continued effort after withdrawal can actually rebuild the very belief we have just released. After this moment of withdrawal, there often comes a subtle temptation, one that is not easily recognized because it appears spiritual. It is the temptation to continue working, to continue treating, to continue doing something so that the healing may be completed. And yet, it is precisely at this point that continued effort can undo what recognition has already accomplished. For effort, even spiritual effort, belongs to the realm of the dream. When you have withdrawn belief, when you have clearly seen that you are not dealing with a person, a condition, or a power, there is nothing left to fix. At that moment, trying to heal is no longer faith, it is doubt. It is the mind quietly saying, perhaps that recognition was not enough. And the moment that thought is entertained, consciousness begins to drift back toward appearance. The dream reasserts itself, not because it has power, but because attention has returned to it. This is why the infinite way does not teach prolonged mental treatment. It does not teach repetition of declarations or continual affirmations directed at a problem. All of these practices keep the mind active in the realm of effect. They keep consciousness circling around appearances. And what consciousness circles around, it sustains. The mind, however well-intentioned, cannot heal what it continues to watch. The Christ did not say, think correctly and you will be healed. He said, it is finished. That statement did not come after visible evidence. It came from realization. Completion is not the result of effort. It is the recognition of wholeness. And wholeness cannot be improved upon. The moment you recognize wholeness, the work is done, even if appearances have not yet yielded. Trying to heal after recognition is like trying to wake yourself after you are already awake. It is unnecessary, and it can only create confusion. Once you see that the dream is a dream, you do not go back into it to rearrange its symbols. You remain awake. In the same way, once you have recognized that a claim is not reality, you do not continue to work on it. You remain in truth. This is where many students become uneasy. The human mind wants reassurance. It wants proof. It wants visible change. And so it returns again and again to the appearance, checking to see if something has happened. But this checking is not neutral. It is participation. It is the mind asking, is this real after all? And that question reopens the door that recognition had closed. Jesus warned against this very tendency when he said, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. Looking back is not sin, it is doubt. It is the inability to remain in realization. The infinite way asks for something very radical here, not effort, but trust. Trust that recognition is sufficient. Trust that God does not require your continued attention to appearances in order to function. Let us be clear. Ceasing effort does not mean indifference. It does not mean carelessness. It means confidence in God. It means allowing divine law to operate without interference. When the farmer plants a seed, he does not dig it up each morning to see if it is growing. He knows the law works in silence. In the same way, Spiritual healing unfolds under the law of God, not under the supervision of the human mind. The moment you feel compelled to try again, to repeat a treatment, to mentally work on a situation that has already been recognized as unreal, stop and see what is happening. You are being tempted back into the dream. The temptation is subtle, but it is powerful because it appeals to responsibility. It says, you must do something. And the infinite way answers, be still and know. Stillness is not something we enter to make healing happen. Stillness is the natural state of consciousness when there is nothing left to fix. It is the resting place after recognition. And in this stillness, something takes place that effort can never accomplish. The activity of God becomes evident, not as noise, not as excitement, but as quiet assurance. It is here that we learn the difference between doing and being. Doing belongs to the personal sense. Being belongs to the Christ. I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. That is not poetry. It is instruction. It tells us exactly when to stop. When I am doing, the work is human. When I have ceased, the work is divine. So we do not try to heal. We do not try to maintain healing. We do not try to protect healing. We rest in the truth that God is the only healer and that God's work is complete. If thought wanders, we gently return not to the problem, but to God, not to effort, but to awareness, not to fear, but to peace. And it is in this peace, not in effort, that the next unfoldment naturally takes place. For when striving ends, something else becomes possible. True stillness, not as a practice, but as a state of surrender in which God is known. Now we arrive at stillness not as the human mind commonly understands it, but as it is revealed in the spiritual life. Stillness in the infinite way is not something we practice in order to gain a result. It is not a method we employ to bring about healing. Stillness is what naturally remains when effort has ceased and belief in appearances has been withdrawn. It is not something we enter. It is something that is revealed when there is nothing left to do. Many students misunderstand stillness because they approach it mentally. They try to quiet thought. They try to stop thinking. They try to hold the mind in silence. And this very trying is effort. This very effort is another form of doing. Stillness is not the absence of thought achieved through discipline. It is the absence of resistance achieved through surrender. When there is no longer a problem to solve, thought becomes quiet by itself. Stillness is the Sabbath of consciousness. It is the resting from labor, not physical labor, but mental and spiritual labor. On the seventh day, God rested. This does not mean that God became inactive. It means that creation was complete. And when creation is complete, there is nothing to fix, nothing to improve, nothing to correct. Stillness is the recognition that God's work is finished and that we are living within that finished work. This is why the Master could say, "Take no thought for your life." He was not teaching carelessness. He was revealing a higher order of living. Taking thought implies responsibility for outcome. Stillness releases that responsibility. Stillness says, "The Father within doeth the works." And if the Father is doing the work, what remains for the personal sense to do? Nothing except to consent. True stillness is consent. It is the yielding of the personal will. It is the quiet acceptance that God is present, active, and sufficient. It is not passive waiting. It is alert awareness. It is not blankness. It is receptivity. It is not unconsciousness. It is heightened spiritual consciousness. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength, not in effort, not in anxiety, in quietness. When stillness is real, you will know it not by emotion, not by sensation, but by peace. Peace is always the sign that consciousness has aligned with truth. Peace does not come because something has been fixed. Peace comes because something has been recognized. And where peace is, healing is already present, even if it has not yet appeared outwardly. This is the point at which many students become impatient. They want stillness to produce something. They want it to demonstrate quickly. But stillness is not a means to an end. Stillness is an end in itself. It is communion with God, and communion is never hurried. Communion does not ask, has anything happened yet? Communion rests in being. You may find that in this stillness there comes a sense of presence, or a warmth, or a gentle assurance. Or you may find nothing at all. Do not evaluate. Evaluation returns you to the mind. The stillness is not judged by experience. Experience is corrected by stillness. The work is not to feel something. The work is to be still enough for God to be known. Elijah did not find God in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He found God in the still, small voice. And that voice was not dramatic. It did not shout. It did not argue. It did not explain. It simply was. And in that presence, all doubt vanished. This is the stillness to which the infinite way points, not as a technique, but as a state of surrender. As this surrender deepens, something begins to happen without effort. Assurance replaces anxiety. Trust replaces vigilance. Confidence replaces fear. You are no longer watching the condition. You are resting in God. And this resting is not inactivity, it is alignment. It is the alignment of human consciousness with divine reality. When stillness is entered in this way, it naturally gives way to something else, something that cannot be manufactured, something that cannot be forced. It gives way to an inner knowing, an assurance that the matter is settled. This is not suggestion, it is revelation. And it is this revelation that completes the healing work. This brings us to the next unfoldment, where we must understand the nature of this inner assurance, what it is not, and why it alone heals. Now we come to that point in spiritual work which cannot be taught in words and yet must be spoken of, because without it, the infinite way becomes only an idea. This is the point of inner assurance. It is not belief. It is not hope. It is not optimism. It is not the repetition of truth. It is the moment when something within you knows, and knowing replaces effort. This assurance does not come because you have reasoned correctly. It does not come because you have been faithful in study. It does not come because you have prayed long enough or deeply enough. It comes when consciousness has yielded to reality. It comes when the personal sense has stepped aside and allowed God to be known. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. That voice is not heard with the ears, and it does not speak in language. It speaks as certainty. When this assurance comes, there is no longer a question. You are not wondering whether the healing will take place. You are not watching for improvement. You are not measuring progress. The matter is finished, not because you say it is finished, but because you know it is finished. And this knowing has no excitement in it. It is quiet. It is calm. It is final. Many students miss this because they are looking for something dramatic. They expect assurance to come with emotion, with sensation, or with some visible sign. But the assurance that heals is often so gentle that it can be overlooked. It may come as a simple peace. It may come as a sense of rest. It may come as the absence of concern. Suddenly, you realize that you are no longer thinking about the problem, and that realization comes afterward, not during. This is why Jesus could say, "Thy faith hath made thee whole," even before any visible change appeared. Faith, in this sense, is not belief in a future event. Faith is the recognition of present reality. Faith is knowing that God is and that nothing else has power. When this faith is present, healing is inevitable because nothing remains to obstruct it. The inner assurance is the evidence that consciousness has shifted from effect to cause. You are no longer dealing with what appears, you are resting in what is, and what is God. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Dwelling is not visiting. Dwelling is remaining. And when you remain in this assurance, there is nothing left to do. At this point, it is important to understand that assurance does not mean perfection of human behavior or absence of future challenges. It means that in this moment, the claim that presented itself has lost its authority. The hypnotic suggestion has been broken. Consciousness has been freed. And when consciousness is free, the body, the affairs, and the circumstances must follow, because they are but shadows on the screen of awareness. Do not attempt to hold on to assurance. Holding is effort. Assurance holds you. It carries itself. If you attempt to recreate it, you will return to the mind. If you attempt to prolong it, you will reintroduce willpower. Let assurance be what it is, the natural outcome of surrender. When it fades, you do not mourn its passing. You simply return again to stillness, to recognition, to God. There is a great temptation at this point to rush out and tell others, to explain what has happened, to share the experience. This, too, can dissipate the work. The Master warned us, "Go thy way and tell no man." Healing is sealed in silence. The more quietly it is held, the more completely it unfolds. Words belong to the mind. Assurance belongs to spirit. And now we must understand something that often troubles students. Why, after assurance has come, appearances sometimes linger? Why does the body not immediately conform? Why does the situation not instantly resolve? This does not mean that the work has failed. It means only that belief dissolves before appearance changes. Consciousness leads, form follows, always. Which brings us naturally to the next unfoldment, how to remain at peace when appearances do not immediately agree with what has been realized, and why this peace is itself the final proof of healing. At this stage of spiritual unfoldment, many students encounter what appears to be a contradiction. They have had the inner assurance, they have known peace, they have felt the release, and yet the body may still show a symptom, or the circumstance may still appear unchanged. This is the moment when understanding must deepen, or the student will fall back into effort. You must remember this. Healing takes place in consciousness first, always. The outer picture is never the cause, it is always the effect. Therefore, when consciousness has been lifted, enlightened, freed, the work is done even if the evidence has not yet caught up. The mistake is to return to the evidence and use it as a measure of truth, that is, judging after appearances. And the Master warned us against this. Jesus never waited for symptoms to disappear before declaring healing complete. He said, "Go thy way," while the leper still stood there. He said, "Rise, take up thy bed," while the man still lay upon it. The command was not directed at matter. It was directed at belief. And belief yielded when authority was withdrawn from appearance and restored to God. When symptoms linger, they do so only because consciousness is adjusting to a higher recognition. The shadow does not vanish instantly when the light is turned on. It fades as the light fills the room. Do not fight the shadow. Do not analyze it. Do not fear it. Simply do not grant it meaning. Meaning is power, and you are no longer giving power to appearances. At this point, the most important practice is non-interference. You do not retreat. You do not re-argue. You do not go back to denial or affirmation. You remain in the quiet, knowing that God is present and that God's work is finished. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Standing still is the highest form of faith. If fear attempts to reassert itself, recognize it for what it is, not your fear, but a universal suggestion. It is the old mesmerism attempting to reclaim attention. Do not personalize it. Do not resist it. Simply return to the recognition. This has nothing to do with me. God is. And that recognition dissolves fear without struggle. Now we come to the point where spiritual healing merges into spiritual living. Healing as a separate activity begins to fade because life itself becomes the prayer. You are no longer going to God for help. You are living in God as help. This is the transition from demonstration to grace. In this stage, you are not constantly checking yourself. You are not asking, am I still healed? You are not monitoring your consciousness. You are simply living from the awareness that God is the source, substance, and activity of your being. This is what it means to pray without ceasing. The infinite way does not ask you to withdraw from life. It asks you to withdraw dependence on life as a material process. You still work, you still serve, you still love, but you do so without personal strain. You are no longer the doer, you are the witness. I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. This is why spiritual living must replace spiritual effort. Effort belongs to the belief that something is lacking. Living from realization acknowledges that nothing is missing. When temptation comes, whether in the form of fear, ambition, resentment, or desire, you do not battle it. You recognize it as another attempt to draw you back into the Adam dream, and you let it pass. Grace is effortless because it is already in motion. You are not trying to make God act. You are ceasing to block God's action. This is the great reversal that the infinite way brings to human thought. We are not seeking harmony. We are yielding to it. We are not trying to become spiritual. We are awakening to what we already are. As this consciousness stabilizes, something remarkable occurs. The world loses its power over you, not because you withdraw from it, but because you no longer believe it governs life. You begin to see that much of what the world fears, worships, and strives for is built upon agreement, not truth. Disease, lack, danger, even death itself, these persist only through collective belief. They are maintained by universal acceptance. But when consciousness awakens, it steps out of that agreement. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Renewal is not improvement, it is replacement. This does not make you indifferent to others. On the contrary, it makes you compassionate without burden. You no longer try to fix people. You no longer judge them. You see through appearances to the Christ within. And this seeing is healing, whether spoken or unspoken. Your very presence becomes a ministry, not because you say the right words, but because you are not hypnotized by appearances. Light does not argue with darkness. It simply shines, and darkness disappears without explanation. As this consciousness stabilizes, something remarkable occurs. The world loses its power over you, not because you withdraw from it, but because you no longer believe it governs life. You begin to see that much of what the world fears, worships, and strives for is built upon agreement, not truth. Disease, lack, danger, even death itself, these persist only through collective belief. They are maintained by universal acceptance. But when consciousness awakens, it steps out of that agreement. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Renewal is not improvement, it is replacement. This does not make you indifferent to others. On the contrary, it makes you compassionate without burden. You no longer try to fix people. You no longer judge them. You see through appearances to the Christ within, and this seeing is healing, whether spoken or unspoken. Your very presence becomes a ministry, not because you say the right words, but because you are not hypnotized by appearances. Light does not argue with darkness, it simply shines, and darkness disappears without explanation. And now we come to the end of seeking, not the end of growth, but the end of striving, the end of looking for God as though God were absent, the end of healing as a project, the end of spiritual ambition. It is finished. These were not words of exhaustion. They were words of realization. They were the declaration that nothing more needs to be done, added, corrected, or overcome. When this realization dawns, life becomes simple. Not always easy, but simple. You return again and again, not to techniques, but to presence, not to words, but to silence, not to effort, but to surrender. And in that surrender, you find that life unfolds with intelligence, care, and order beyond human planning. This is the infinite way, not a method, not a system, not a religion, but a way of being in which God lives itself as you. I and my Father are one, not someday, not after healing, now. Rest in that, abide in that, and let the truth live you.